Start at the beginning. Before you went into the Army, what were you doing?
I was going to the University of Iowa.
Mm-hmm.
And I had a science major because I wanted to be a dentist. And so my first clue to what my Army life was going to be like was that after having taken 8 hours of physics, I applied through the University of Chicago for a school in the service. And they said, we accept you and you have to enlist through the draft. I was going to be drafted anyway. So then I went to school most of the time. The first year and a half that I was in the service. And then I ultimately was in the ASTP program. So I, along with many others, went to the infantry outfits when they discontinued that program because they really needed that type of person in the infantry. So when we hit the 12th Armored Division, of course, they kidded us all because they wondered how well we were going to do with our slide rules instead of an M1 rifle. And probably my most exciting experience was that just a couple of days after all of our school personnel hit the 12th Armored Division, they came in off of maneuvers on the field, and one of them brought in a anti-tank shell, which he thought was armor piercing, but apparently it had HE on it, which means high explosive. And he tossed it to me, and I caught it, looked at it, and tossed it back to him. Souvenir from the field. Well, he was very curious and started to take this little chrome-plated piece apart from the back of the shell, and of course it went off. Well, it blew his arm off, and all the sides out of the barracks. Feathers were flying from the pillows, you know. And so I ended up in the hospital for 6 weeks. And then by that time I had no training at all, was still a rifleman, and went home 2 weeks for a furlough, and then they sent us overseas. I went as a rifleman, but you've told him the story about one of the communication people had to take an emergency furlough and go home, and one of my schoolmates who happened to be assigned to a clerk's position in the battalion headquarters said, "Oh yes," he says, "I know where there's a radio operator down in C Company." And so I was interviewed, and I can remember telling the Captain Fairburn of C Company, which was a marvelous guy, that I really wanted to transfer to battalion headquarters. And so I spent my time in the headquarters track with a great big radio and a big antenna sticking out of it for the rest of the time. And it saved my life. It was a lot better duty than that foxhole.
Wow. Now, backing up a little bit before that, when you were assigned to the 12th Armored, to take it when it was ASTP disbanded, that was that was at Camp Barkley, correct?
Yes.
And so after that, the trip across the ocean, which ship were you on? Do you recall? Was it
the Empress of Australia.
Oh, tell me a little bit about the crossing. I've heard some great stories about that.
Well, we got on board to the tune of the 1 o'clock jump. And I really enjoyed that. I'd go at night, especially on the bow. And the bow would go up and then down and up and down, and you see the other people in our convoy appear and disappear behind the waves. And of course the rest of the guys were down below throwing up, you know, from seasickness. But it was very exciting to know that there might be some submarine activity.
Wow. Okay, now, getting into France, crossing the channel on the LSTs.
Yeah.
Tell me about your first days in France.
Well, it was raining, and when we did arrive, one of the jetties that was out there at the shoreline hollered at us as we were coming in on the landing craft, and he said, "Where have you been?" Well, we were glad to be several months after D-Day because I couldn't imagine surviving that situation. And I remember that we did camp out with our shelter hats and stuff that night, and it was raining, and there was rain in my pockets of my raincoat. I did have a raincoat, but the rain even went into the pockets and then dripped in on your clothing, of course. So it was sort of a worrisome time.
Now, you talked about being the radio operator in the battalion headquarters track saved your life. Tell me a little bit about your first combat experience.
Well, my first combat experience was coming through an area where we'd already had an engagement, and I saw my first German casualty in the street. And it was a kid about 17 years old with red hair. And I thought, is this what we're getting into? So it was very strange to meet with that type of situation early on, if that answers your question.
Oh, absolutely. Now, some of the famous actions, the ones that historians like to talk about and write about, the Battle of Herlisheim, for example, were you involved?
Well, I was involved in the town of Rohweiler, where the battalion headquarters was, and my half-track was sitting right outside the battalion headquarters, which was a brick family residence. And we used that, and all the houses along the line that faced toward the waterworks, which was a famous landmark, which you've heard about, and part of my duty was to do some relay work, since we had FM radios for the companies. And once in a while I would go out of the half-track and I would go to relay either someplace in the basement of this old building that would let us have better contact with the guys that are on the line. And but most of the time I did spend in the half-track with a big CD radio with higher headquarters, and we did messages in code groups only. Only in emergency was there a clear text message, and when we did that under an emergency time, we got so much interference from higher headquarters challenging our authenticity, and so it proved to be a unsuccessful communication venture.
Okay, now next up, the Colmar Pocket operation.
Well, I can only remember the parts having been in the half-track most of that time, and which was incidentally a fascinating job. I could work 20 hours a day and still be enthusiastic about what I was doing. And we did have a parade down through the streets in the Colmar, and people would come out and they would give us maybe some wine, or they would give us some artificial coffee. Anytime our column would come to a halt, the civilians would come out and shake our hands or hug us or something if we were on the street. So it was a fun time after the bad part.
Now, for the push to the Rhine and the attachment to Patton's Third Army, everyone seems to have a story about working under General Patton. How about you?
Oh, sure. He was, obviously colorful and inspirational. And somewhere along our route, he would always be stationed at some point where he could see us and we could see him. And of course, we were traveling in reckless abandon. Then we traveled at night with our lights on and sirens were on the tanks, and people would maybe at an intersection ride around and check all the German road signs, which they unfortunately left for us to use. But anyway, it was different, and it was, like I say, sort of fun. The Free French were in on this, and they were extremely foolhardy.
How so?
Well, they just didn't pay much attention to their security, as to where they were, and they made a lot of noise and just did everything like it was a big game. That was my observation at that moment, anyway.
Wow. Okay, and finally, across the Rhine and into Germany.
Well, of course, there are many times that we were thwarted. We were galloping down the highway. Can't think of the word now.
Autobahn.
Autobahn. Down the Autobahn, see. And then all of a sudden, down ahead of us, there would be a cloud of smoke and a big explosion, and the bridge was gone. So then we had to do another route. We went down to Speyer, which was a really interesting town, and we had to pull out of there in the middle of the night. We were all billeted in a really nice hotel lobby, and I had just received some Wheaties and all this stuff from my mother at home in the postal service, and we dashed out of there in such great rush because of some emergency that I left my Wheaties behind in that hotel. So, and then occasionally we would get caught in some artillery barrage at night, and that was frightening to me because I was sitting in this armored car that had a canvas top.
Okay. Now, were you involved in, or did you witness any of the liberations of the POW camps or the concentration camps?
I was there at Landsberg and the others, but I was really on duty most of those times, and I did not tour any of that. I had my position in that command vehicle, and so we stuck pretty close to that.
Okay, now, do you remember where you were when you got the word the war was over?
Well, we were just about 12 miles from Munich, as I recall, down in Bavaria. And, of course, that was great news. And, of course, the thing that really hurt was sometimes we had guys that were lost only hours before that time arrived. But it was really something.
Now, when the war ended, how long before you mustered out?
Well, we were on a point system. And it was considerable time, which left me in the Army of Occupation for a while, and I did a lot of line work on the telephones, and I had a good buddy who was a professional telephone person, So he taught me how to climb poles and that kind of thing. And as a communications sergeant, I was doing it all, but no radio work anymore. And then I was interested in the Army of Occupation in this respect, that I wanted to learn the language as much as possible, conversational, because I found the civilians to be interesting, and I felt that someday we were going to have to be friends anyway. So maybe we ought to start now. It's my philosophy.
So, getting out of the Army, finally, when did you get back to the States?
In '46, and I can't remember the exact date now, and then the first thing I wanted to do was get back into school again. So I lived only 10 miles from Iowa State University. So they were on a quarter system, so I went there for their quarter, and then my semester began at the University of Iowa. So I continued my road to try to become accepted by the dental school and graduate from dental college. And it worked out. With the GI Bill. The GI Bill made a big difference to me. And my GI time was less than my time in college, so I could go one semester on and one semester off and try to extend my time until I graduated from the College of Dentistry.
Good. Anything else that you'd care to add? Any stories that jump into your mind or things you're dying to tell people?
Well, one kind of funny thing that I just related down in the room below here, and that is that when we had to escape from the Herlesheim situation, and we went out about 1:30, 2:30 in the morning, we were loading all our remote radio stuff that we had in the basement of this CP, or house. And right at the corner of this brick building, two of us met in the darkness. And this one person said to me, "Was ist los?" Well, we were all excited, and I thought, this is no time for foolish activity. So I did one of the dumbest thing that I did in my whole Army career. I said to him, "What did you say?" And his reply was, "Oh gosh," he says, "I'm the battalion interpreter for German. I've been speaking this all day long." And he said, "It just slipped out." So those are the funny parts.
Yeah. Wow. Well, sir, I want to thank you for agreeing to sit down with me again. We're going to have this on digital video, so hopefully it'll be on the website soon. And
On the
it'll be there
website,
for
huh?
historians. and
Okay.
people
Well,
want
I've
to
been
set
to the museum, and you're curator down there now.
up. Yes, sir.
I think that's great. Yeah,
Thanks.
fine. Yeah, that's a big job.